Get ready for a special show, Heretics, from Astro Gnosis, Sophia and Simulated Realities. James, True, the Philosophy of Reality. Prepare to be mind-blown and understand mind control at the same time. You can get all 3 Astro Gnosis conferences for the price of one. Check show notes and please support me in any way you can. Keep the lights of the pleroma on.
About, and you want to come back and reference it. So I don't want you to feel that you're missing something if I just skip through 4 or 5 slides, okay? Also, I don't know how to tell you about reality in an hour. I don't know how to do it. But I'm going to try. We're going to try, and I want to make sure I can drive. Okay, I know you are, but what am I? What is reality? I don't know. Spoiler, you can go home. No fucking clue why we're here. Neither do you, and I'm fine with that. I actually think that reality is richer through the mystery of not knowing what it is. But we're still going to talk about it. The limbic universe comes in through protein molecules that detect 4 things. Every single experience, every single thought you've ever had in your entire life is coming through light, motion, chemical, or temperature. Out of those 4 different elements, there's only 4 different action potentials that the neurons inside your brain have used to store these things: duration, temperance, intensity, and location. So that's it. You have a 16-bit 4 times 4 operating system. You take 16-bit information. You actually are not quite Dolby. You are more like 7.1 surround sound. It's really complicated. And this is an important part of who you are, but more importantly, it's even a better factoring of what is reality itself. Every memory that you've ever had is a collapsed engram of potassium and salt squashed into a single footprint. This footprint is untraceable. We have just constructed a map of the brain, which we'll get to in a second, an atlas of the entire neurological network of the brain, and we've determined that the memories that we store in engrams are not verifiable, meaning that I cannot give you a memory and then dissect your brain and find that memory exactly in there. I can find a footprint of it. And that footprint is huge. It tells us a lot. But it's collapsed. All the information is collapsed. It's very much like it's been compressed into an algorithm, which is something we'll get to. You actually are a time machine. And in order to understand who and what you are, I need you to know that you are 3 time machines living in one. Many of you have heard about a reptilian complex inside of you. Some of you have heard that that's been debunked. Even some of you have heard that 20 years later that was unbunked and it's now back on the table. What you call you is here. Sorry, we have a laser, I think. What you call you is here, and you are 250 milliseconds behind your reptile. There's a creature inside of you, an entity, that's living ahead of you by 250 milliseconds. It understands things before you do. It senses things before you do. It has history before you do. It has present before you do. You are not living in the present. Your reptile is. The reflexology of your back, all of the musculature in your spine is pure reptile. Most of the inputs that come in never even reach the brain. They go right to the spine and turn right around and go right back out. So they don't even need to contact the brain. The intelligence is built into the structure of the spine itself. So you can see all these different speeds it takes for you to find information, and that the speed of these different takes leads you all the way down to your neocortex, the thing that you think is you, or that most of you think is you, is 500 milliseconds behind actual time. We hallucinate and rebuild reality 500 seconds in the past and tell a story about when it happened in order to sync up our signals. It is not an accuracy, it is a conglomeration. It's a collation of papers. It has nothing to do with being accurate, it has to do with being ordered correctly. So when I say accurate, I mean in time itself. There are 3 of you, and this is probably the heart of my talk. Epimetheus is your past. It's your spirit animal. It's your hindbrain. I know that I heard the word woo-woo pressed around yesterday as like a bad word. I love woo-woo. Woo-wee is an even better word, but I want you to know this is not esoteric. The epimetheus, the hindbrain, is actually geared for nothing but the past. It's your spirit animal. And a lot of us trust our spirit animal, and a lot of us have learned, maybe I shouldn't trust my spirit animal. And that's only because your spirit animal only knows the past. So your spirit animal is basically here to go, don't eat fire, man. Don't do that again. It was a bad idea, right? Please don't chase the pterodactyl. Whatever it is that we've learned, it's been built into this historic method, which is the avoidance of pain. Epimetheus is the avoidance of pain. It is a complete universe built on the avoidance of pain. Your reflexology, the center part of who you are, this reptilian, the reflex you, doesn't have the ability to remember pain. It's living in the present. And if it was, it probably wouldn't function because it would go into shock knowing what's coming next. So it's the hindbrain that's been disassociated. It's been separated into an id. So you have an id, your brainstem. You have an ego, the hindbrain. And then you have a superego, the neocortex. So the superego is Prometheus. Pro, to look forward. Epi, to look back. Epi and Prometheus were brothers, twin brothers. One invented the animals, named the animals. The story goes that after he was finished, there was nothing else left to name. And so Prometheus got the sacred fire instead. What is this sacred fire? What is it? And it's the ability to transmute yourself into the future before you get there. It's one of the most powerful things we've ever seen. You are able to speculate and quantize your world and then go there. None of us see a deer. We find the quantum of a deer. We look for the probability that has the best possibility of what we seek, and we call that thing a deer until we're proven wrong. This is not the same as reality. This is a speculative, hypothetical, but only on a contract that something's going to be there, that we see things. It's not a free-range sight. And this is probably why we don't see flying purple people eaters. We have archetypes of them. We have archetypes of these things, but we don't actually directly perceive them. And as what you're about to see, the reason why you don't perceive them is more profound than we think. There is a Star of David, some of you call it Remfram, that's fine, inside your spine. You have a triangular nerve system that literally tells you, as above, so below. You have afferent nerves moving from one direction and efferent nerves moving from the other. So the action is one direction, the hot, the cold is the sensation, the feeling of what's there. So the Star of David is literally who you are. It's a direct balance of this flow. Information, action, information, action, information, action. That's the heart of your spine. This is the heart of the reptilian. So you just found out the reptile inside you is Jewish. So good job. Qualia, probably one of the most important words for us to move forward here. Most of us come from a time and place where qualia isn't even on the map. We tend to come from a binary where you're either alive or you're dead. And this is 2-bit, but you were 16-bit. And with that 16-bit and with your 3 time machines, you've been able to extract something richer, a kind of honey from the moments. And that honey is qualia. It is the saturation of your association into the now, or into this world that we don't know. And so qualia ends up being, in my opinion, a better landscape for the cosmos that you live in than Mother Terra herself. The quality of your experience determines the terrain that you live on. It's not the dirt, it is the quality that you feel in that dirt that gives you saturation into life. The needle on the record fits into the groove perturbates it, and you listen to the sound. How deeply the needle is into the groove, you would think would give you a thicker signal, and qualia works the same way. There's a rumor going around that man is the most intelligent creature on this planet. I think this is hilarious. I think it's hilarious that we are the ones in charge of naming that, and we named ourselves that. And one of the reasons why we tried to discredit orcas is because we tried to say, well, the folds in their brain aren't as deep as ours, and we have deeper folds. And then we actually started autopsying these orcas, and it turns out, no, their folds are much deeper too. So you're looking at a structured prejudice that's built into our analysis of other creatures. One of the main mistakes that we have in thinking that orca is not as sentient as we are is in what we would call their cruelty. The cruelty that they display towards each other, you're going to find out, is actually more about volume. It's more about amperage. It's not cruel, it's just that your drum of consciousness is too delicate to associate with them. These are the bass drums of the world. They listen to the pounding of emotions. The qualia that they require is so much higher than yours that we see them as violent, inhumane creatures, when in fact, the best way to categorize them is highly schizophrenic. That we would separate them and put them in a separate place because of their schizophrenia if they had elbows. Lord Osborne, a rambling clam. David just spoke about an electrical interference he felt when he invoked, it was either Hecate or Lilith. And I noticed this slide when he said that because the same spot on your brain receives all these signals. This is your parabola dish, and your parabola dish is receiving information from some source that I don't know, and that this parabola dish is going to determine the resolution of what you see. So what is reality? Reality is defined as the world or the state of things as they actually exist, as opposed to an idealistic or a notional idea of them. Oxford English Dictionary. Okay, so what does actually mean? Well, actually means see the word fact. So apparently the definition of actually means see fact. So we go to fact. Fact is a statement that can be proven true or false through objective, through objective evidence, does not rely on the author's beliefs, ideas, or feelings, which means that every scientist who's ever discovered anything had no feelings about it whatsoever. Does that sound true to any of you? Because it doesn't to me. Objective reality is a crutch. It's a crutch for an underdeveloped mind that lacks the plasma to render its own reality. The saturation of that reality is no different than a story. I completed a sci-fi novel not too long ago. Very difficult for me to maintain a character story, an arc that stretches through 20, 30,000 pages. The plasma required for that was something beyond what I'd currently been at. I needed to exercise more to find the torque of my belief. And until I have that torque, I have the crutch of objectivity. What is objectivity? It's majority rule. It's mob rule. Objective reality is mob rule. And that the qualia, the mean qualia of everyone in the room, is literally the only factor that determines what's real. Nothing else does. Reality in the ATM. When I was in college, I wanted to write a paper suggesting that an ATM machine gives us a new definition of reality. I was told that I shouldn't do that topic because it's not philosophical enough. Still kind of pissed about that, but here I am now getting to do it now, so I'm fine. But if you think about what happens in an ATM window, the screen, and you've got 2 bits, you've got green and not green, and that 2-bit resolution has more power and influence over many of us than the thickest, richest experience we can have. And I would argue with you, if you wanted to argue, that the ATM machine is a viable reality. And what gives it the viable reality is your witness and your torque of belief as you press it into the ATM machine. The secrecy that you protect your PIN code is a kind of reverence, and that reverence that you imbue into it by taking all of your resources and depositing them into this imaginary world that you have no control over, that you can't see or touch, is you imbuing that reality and making it real. The definition of objective reality requires that math is more real than the physical world. And I bet a lot of you think, oh, math is fucking totally solid. It's objective as heck. It's one of the most objective things out there. And you got to deal with this guy. He's going to screw that up for you. Sorry. The 1931 Australian logician Kurt Gödel wrote this paradox. The paradox of logic and mathematics is that it lacks the ability to demonstrate its own provability. Oh my God, what did we just do? We just showed that math, one of the most primal axioms that we tend to insist objective reality must be true because math is true, actually fundamentally has no legs to stand on. This is not a questionable theory. It's actually quite provable. It actually makes all of our math easier because we've given up on trying to declare it as a definitive way. Mahindra Satyam is a company that took the belief that you have in the objective truth of math and squandered $1.1 billion out of your pockets by doing that. And they did that by converting a floating point number into a long point number. An unsigned long integer, waiting for you to fall asleep, will be converted over 32 bits. And when you take the little endian and switch it with the big endian and then turn it into a float overnight when no one's looking, you end up with 0.1113 milliseconds of a cent that has to go somewhere. The parables of math are not actually accurate when we apply them in the real world. When you start to change the decimal place, you lose information. And when you lose information, you now have a giant hole in a system that all of you were told proves that objectivity is nice and tight and clean. And it's not. It doesn't work. Why does it not work? Because of quantization. Quantization is probably the best way to describe this is a musician term. I can quantize a beat to make it fit into a framework of 16 measures or 4/4 time. And it's kind of like auto-tuning a voice. I can enter a beat that's really sloppy and I can hit quantize and the machine will take the beat and place it into a cleaner slot. It changes the actual data, but now we have an objective agreed upon 4x4 signature that everyone can play to. So objective reality really is the manipulation of reality taking out of the real, placing it into the hypothetical, exchanging that hypothetical with someone else, and then both of you dealing with how it quantizes out the back end. And it's never clean. The logic problem. I majored in philosophy. It's like heresy for me to fucking say this. But logic has a problem. Believing we know the difference between logic and consensus is impossible. It's impossible. And I believe one of the biggest problems for this is because of our cerebellum. All of your logic is going to occur in the latest part of the brain, the one that developed the latest up here. But all of your oldest knowledge that you've ever had is right here. And the cerebellum doesn't really work in the principles of logic. Nothing's passed to the cerebellum and asked an algorithm to spit out an answer. This is akin to things that are hard-coded in the system. It's almost like a religious belief. Your cerebellum is the religious belief in the principle of motor mechanics, that it's learning to move its legs through belief in the faith that it's placed in the history of it. Logic is removed when information is stored in the cerebellum and it's just given as dogmatic fact. And that this dogmatic fact allows us to walk, but none of us are able to verify whether it's true because we've run out of storage space to store the algorithm to prove it's true. We just simply trust it. Your brain is a faith-based limbic instrument. I'm not trying to be a smartass, but the brain is a limbic organ. No one's ever known this before 10 years ago. Everyone always insisted, no. The brain is subjective and logical. You have limbic wires that plug into it. And that's just a lower way of understanding the truth of what this beautiful thing is. This is a parabola of feelings justified through an emotional aperture that gives you an ability to accept or deny what's in front of you. And this really comes down to megahertz. So the reason why it's called hertz, as you learned last year at Astro Gnosis, and we're about to see that. I like Einstein. I don't want anyone to think I'm doubting general relativity. I've never seen it necessarily to be flawed, but I've never seen it really to necessarily be true either. Every year, we're able to take the path of the Earth spinning around the sun and use both extremes of the sun to compute the speed of light. And every year, it's different. And this is kind of like embarrassing because the entire framework of literally every single thing we've ever written is based on the idea that the speed of light never changes, but it does. Now, I'm going to tell you that national security is why the speed of light doesn't change. That the communal requirements of us to form a glue, to form a society, requires us to come up with a belief in something that all of us can agree to and conform to so that all of our torque will start to move and shape the freaking world itself to conform to this definition because we are quantizing our environment. We're not looking at our environment naturally. We're quantizing it into a PG-rated version that our brain can drink. Since 1992, I have heard that Iran is 6 months away from a nuclear bomb. It is 2024. 2 months ago, Senator Menendez said, in 2022, 3 to 4 weeks, a month or less. That's how long most analysts have concluded it would take Iran to produce the fission necessary to build a nuclear bomb. So, since 1992 to 2022, we've gone from 6 months to 3 to 4 weeks. Is this a lie? Is this a manipulation? Or is this a quantization of politics? Is this an appeal to everyone else quantizing their world to fit in with a certain framework? And I would say it is. Now, last month, Senator Menendez was convicted on 16 counts of political corruption involving bribery to Egypt. He was basically setting up a situation where Egypt needed some aid money and he was making a little bit off the pocket. He's been caught and convicted, and he said, he's going to step down for a time starting in August, this month. So this just happened in the middle of writing this. And I say this because you're going to see a lot of these, and I'm going to have to go faster through them. Piltdown Man, I'm sure a lot of you guys know this, is a story of the missing link that turned out to be an orangutan. And for 60 plus years, it remained in the world's most prestigious museums, and no one dared question it. I believe, let me make a quick aside here, even though I don't have time. I trust science more than most other fields, but I don't trust science. And I hope that you guys don't see that as a pessimistic, shitting on science. It's more of, why do we think that this one field is pious when everything else is not? Wouldn't we be more scientific? Wouldn't we be more empirical if we could eat these lies with our soup? If we could digest the truth of what we do every single day and know that. So when I show you these things, I'm not trying to turn you against science. I'm trying to turn you against the quantization that science adheres to feel better about itself. National Geographic pushed the Archaeoraptor fraud in 1999. It's a pretty prestigious magazine. This is a latrine fly that the British Museum thought was 38 million years old. A simple visual inspection showed that there was a door and that a latrine body had been inserted into this piece of amber. That took 50 years. It took 50 years to find that. And only now are we seeing it. And I would argue with you that the reason why we see it now in 1993 is because we're finally comfortable to accept that we're full of shit sometimes. I don't mean to cuss so much, sorry. Why are the bees dying? Does anyone remember hearing the bees are dying? I cried my fucking eyes out. It's like, I just cussed again. But I was so sad. It's like, what is wrong with this world? The bees are dying. No one cares. No one's stopping. The bees are dying because 100% humans are bad. That's PBS. Actual fact, honeybee populations have increased globally within the U.S., having a 31% increase from 2007. 31% more bees. The truth has been quantized into a cosmology that humans are bad. And there's a profit to that. Many of you will say it's because government wants us to think bad. No. You are the government. You want to think bad. And you've hired the representatives which will quantize the propaganda necessary to keep you in your place, because when you're in your place, you feel that you cannot make a mistake. And when you feel you cannot make a mistake, you think you're perfect. And I would say that obedience and wisdom are different things, but we don't know those yet. We're getting there. But until we do, we need the objective reality crutch to help us along. I believe objective reality helps us. I do not think it's an enemy. I think it's a very, very important teat that we need until we're ready to go out on our own. This just happened. It actually hasn't been officially convicted yet. But in June 23, Gino here with Harvard University was caught with 1,200-page report that found research misconduct intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly. I bring this up because I have more respect for Harvard than any other university. And I need you to know that at the very tip top, the places that we respect the most, people are doping. Lance Armstrong didn't teach you that Lance Armstrong is doping. Lance Armstrong showed you that if you want to be on the Peloton, if you want to play in the Tour de France, you're going to stick a needle in your ass and pretend you didn't. It's not just Lance. We're only willing to accept Lance. We're not yet ready to understand that fraud is ubiquitous throughout every field. We're getting there. This woman fooled 2 doctors, 2 senators, 2 secretaries of state, 2 secretaries of defense, 2 CEOs of engineering banking, the director of the CDC, and a dean at Stanford University. This guy authored 12 reports that contained falsified information, including lab panels that had been stitched together, backgrounds that were digitally altered, and blot results taken from other research paper and just copy and pasted together. It sat in the annals of Stanford's finest work for 2-3 decades. No one noticed. It took a student reporter writing for the local paper, I believe, to crack this story. And the veneration that we give these organizations is directly proportional to how much they are allowed to dope. Directly proportional. So by worshiping the church, they're going to diddle kids. It's the same kind of thing. The more you give them the power of cleanliness, the more they are allowed to be dirty. It's an important concept in the prana economy of life. General Leslie McNair, general who died by friendly fire. I bet none of you know, I don't mean this in an arrogant way, I bet none of you maybe have realized that 1 out of 7 war heroes are killed by us. That we kill 1 out of 7 war heroes that we worship were killed by our own side. And that the reason why we don't know this is because friendly fire has to be quantized to 0 every time. Who wants to tell, raise your hand if you want to tell someone's mother that the reason why her son died is because Roger threw a grenade at him? You do? Okay. So this is a deeper truth that I hope you see echoes up, because this isn't an evilness that's hiding this. This is a respect for life that's hiding this. It's the idea that how could we write on the tombstone that his life was given in vain for something as stupid as a bureaucratic mistake on a sheet of paper. And until we understand that this 1 in 7 rate, this 15% casualty rate, is not an anomaly, it's actually just a part of war itself, we're going to keep thinking war is heroic. We're going to keep thinking it's logical. We're going to keep thinking it's wise. This is an inflatable plane. It's inflatable. I added the nose. It's inflatable. And the reason why it's inflatable is because there's a false target program that's very, very important to the military. I had a secret rating in the Navy. I know this firsthand. There's many, many technologies that are purposely created to fool you, the American people. There's not this honesty line where we kind of slip you a paper and tell you what's really going on and then tell everyone else something else. This is an inflatable plane presented to you by CNN as to show you how desperate Afghanistans were to come to America because they were clinging to the plane and falling off miles away. And if you were scrutinizing your government and quantizing them enough, you would realize that there was an odd camera change right before this thing is taxiing until this other plane is taking off, and that the plane taking off, you can see into the windows versus these blacked out. Another quick point is if you look up this plane on the internet, you will find the inflatable version of it, and that'll tell you even more that this is probably true. None of these things I can prove are true either, and this is the crucial part of what reality is. In 1966, Halt and Arp published the Atlas of 338 Peculiar Galaxies that seem to disprove cosmic redshift. Cosmic redshift is the ability to determine the center of the galaxy by looking at the difference in the way red light and blue light comes into the telescope. Halt and Arp lost his telescope privileges for suggesting that maybe redshift is wrong. Ninovium. 1999, Victor Ninov, Bulgarian physicist, convinced Berkeley that he had discovered 2 periodic element tables. And they said, cool! Is a fraud. And this is like one of 3 of these guys that have done this. Purdue told you that remember this? We've developed cold fusion on the tabletop, and it was tepid fusion. It wasn't cold. And I'm being nice with tepid. Of course, Bernie Madoff died of natural causes. Natural causes, right? Is this a mistake? Or is this because the sheer amount of money that he was able to swindle is so painful for us to accept that we have no choice but to quantize him into a natural death and just move on? What happened after Enron? 3 days later, the market recovered. Why were there not fires in the streets? We used to burn witches. Now we let them die of natural causes, right? So the comfort that you need to feel stable in society is really the heart of what makes government propaganda work so well. It's your desire to feel that the world makes sense, which really causes the biggest blind spots in all of us, including me. Roswell, July 1947, the Satelloon program was in full effect. Satelloon program were being launched from Rockefeller Island in Antarctica. These giant football field-sized weather balloons are inflated and go up into the atmosphere, and you're able to dangle a 600-pound piece of equipment to that Satelloon and have it orbit the Earth. Additionally, you're able to fly a large format plane with a sky hook and grab that satellite and do repairs. As someone who's lived in tech, I know that the concept of placing a satellite in space and never ever being able to go hit reset or fix a wire or repair something that supposedly is traveling at 37,000 miles per hour, even though a frictionless environment, that seems very skeptical to me. But a Satelloon program that you could recover each satellite from makes a lot of sense. Right now, there are 33, that's just an ironic number maybe, there are 33 YouTube spy planes in effect that have a satellite enclosure on the bottom. This is an enclosure for instrumentation that's allowed to attach to the bottom of the B-2, and this bomber is an automated flying satellite that can take off and land whenever you want. It's fueled in the air, it's much more efficient, it's closer to the Earth, and more importantly, the delay signal that we seem to have forgotten when we talk about satellites of the radar delay is no longer there. You're dealing with something that's not 200, 300, 15,000 miles in the air. You're dealing with something that's maybe 50,000 feet or higher. I want to remind you all that no one in this room is allowed to travel above 60,000 feet. None of you are going to be able to get a license to build an aircraft that's capable of traveling above the Kármán line, and that's for national security. And that when you create an entire pocket of atmosphere that no one can go to, you're creating a breeding ground of shadow for shadow work to form. The collection of mystery and shadow work will always form where people cannot go. So this ends up being a canvas that the government's allowed to paint things, but you are the painter, not the government. You are. And that as we get more comfortable with contacting extraterrestrial life, we're going to create the propaganda and the stories necessary to quantize our comfortable position into slipping into that. I've written an article called The Reptilian Space Pope. It describes that if you were to introduce an alien life to people like us, you would want to do it carefully. And when I say carefully, let's not give it fingernails. Those are sharp. Let's make it shorter so it's not so tall. Let's give it big kitten eyes that are really cute. Let's make sure it doesn't have any teeth. Let's don't give it any hair because that sounds kind of wild. Let's make it look like a sleek butler with no genitals so it can't rape you. Let's make sure it can't lift more than 30, 40 pounds. What did I just describe? A gray, right? I'm not saying extraterrestrials aren't real. I actually think that orca is an extraterrestrial. I don't think we've made contact with an orca yet. I think that when you go into Sheol, you were finding the true alien life, and it's right here. We purposely choose Zeta Reticuli and say the reptilians are from there because 60 light years away, whatever it is much more comfortable for us to quantize the idea that there's a foreign life out there. So this is a reaching for extraterrestrial life using the instrument of lies to bring it closer to us. And that this is how we do everything. I quantize a deer, I lie to myself there's a deer there. I head for it to figure out, can I disprove or prove my lie? Huh. Let me just see if I can. Well, isn't the reader there? I figured the sensor was there. Let me just see if I can hit space or something. Someone might need to click this for me. Society is required to believe itself, or else it falls apart. The fact that we have a country with 56 million people that will either vote red or blue. We have 8 flavors of sugar water inside McDonald's. We have 2 political parties. The most important decisions that we make, that we get to pick for the leader of what we call the free world, and we have 2 choices. Now, I used to think this is because the world was broken. I used to think this is because the world is evil. And neither of those are true. Oh, good, it works. Oh, unless you just did that, thank you. The Manhattan Project employed 130,000 Americans, and none of them knew what they were doing. I don't mean they were incompetent. They were very competent, the most competent, but they didn't know what they were working on. And when you start to unravel the sheer brilliance of the NASA jobs program, you're looking at a pride-inducing, self-worth-inducing system where they buy screws from every town in America to quantize the idea that we have mastered satellite technology in space, for example. These things are important to government. A government that does not lie to you is a government that does not care and does not understand you as a person. And I think fundamentally this is where we have a schism between thinking government is good and bad. Government is effective. Government is professional. Government is the top elite when it comes to stimulating and managing your mental state. So imagine the world isn't broken. I can hear some of you groaning. I've just dismissed all your feelings. but I need you to do it. I need you to call yourself arrogant for looking at a system that is so immersive, so quantizing, so moving, that it makes you cry, it makes you shout, it makes you angry, and you're going to call that system broken. I need you to see how flawed it is to insist this place is broken. This is a garden of consciousness. It is a garden of qualified consciousness that grows over time. And only when you start to see this system is perfect can you adopt the posture that I'm trying to sell you today about what reality is. The thing that taught me this more than anything was this profound find. Templo Mayor in Mexico City has been obliterated. We're just now finding the remnants of it. There are 7 different versions of this. Templo Mayor is a crystal that seems to form on top of itself, different levels. Templo Mayor, the etymology is the authority. And in the Temple of Authority, for centuries, we had a system where we either worshipped the rain god, Thalak, or the war god, Huitzilopochtli. And that when you climbed to the temple, you got to choose which sacrifice, which prisoner, your sacrifice prisoner, you walked up the temple steps and you got to vote. Do I sacrifice this guy from the Flower War to Thalak, or do I sacrifice to Huitzilopochtli? Does anyone see a corollary here? Obviously, right? Thalak is the god of the fear of global warming. Huitzilopochtli is the fear of terrorism. Sound familiar? Our two-party system is still alive right now. The very swamp that Mexico City is said to be founded on, where the lotus blooms, the swamp of Washington, D.C., grows the exact same crystal. Now, this tells me it's not broken. This tells me there's something in the soil. There is a conscious nutrient that expresses itself much like a Creole accent comes out of someone living in Louisiana. And so you have these things that are broadcasted, and they're broadcasted from places that we have quantized out of our realm of understanding. Even bigger clue. Coyolxauhqui, beginning of the sacrifice season, the Liberty Bell. This is Bells in Cheeks. Her name is Bells in Cheeks. And to start off the sacrificial season, she is flayed and thrown from the pyramid. Her body is broken. Her body is cracked. And liberty is sacrificed for the good of the land. Coyolxauhqui represents the beginning of the sacrificial season where the rest are sacrificed to either the Democrats or the Republicans. And this is the Liberty Bell. Her name is Bells on Cheeks. To me, this is the resonance of the soil of Amu Ra Ka. Might be a better way of looking at it. Amu, Python. Ra, Ka, the soul. The soul of the Pythos of Ka is America. That we are living in Quetzalcoatl, the living creature that is so big we have quantized himself into rivers and roads and bureaucracy and taxes. And all those things are a living embodiment of a biology that we have not been able to quantize as real because it hurts too much. It's a big thing to think about living inside this large creature. 18... You see, how does this go? Yeah. In order for Templo Mayor to function as a glue for society, every 18 days, someone needed to be sacrificed. And in Amu Raka, every 265 days, we're killing someone that we know for a fact 25% of all people on death row turn out to be innocent, and 50% of them turn out to have a frontal head wound injury that seems to knock out their frontal cortex. So, are those accidental deaths? Or are they sacrifices necessary for the glue of society to take hold? So why do we lie? The answer is we have to. You are directly hardwired into this limbic system I told you about. When you are directly hardwired into it, if you've ever taken a microphone and placed it near an amplifier, feedback might start, and it resonates, and next thing you can't hear anything. It's one of the most painful experiences you can have. And that when you are hardwired into your limbic system without a governor, that would be torture. You need a way to suppress the conscious qualia that's coming into you and sequester it into a 8-bit, 4-bit, 16-bit, whatever resolution you are, to digest what you've just heard. This is called the aperture. The amygdala does this job in the brain. I wish I could tell you more about this. I've got a lot of research just on this concept of how aperture works, how the hippocampus works with the amygdala to regulate the experiences that come in by distributing melanin to the very places where your senses pick up. Your inner ears have melanin. The inside of your nose has melanin. And so the same places everywhere you find receptors in your skin, you have melanocytes that distribute a very special kind of chemical. Melanin, we can build electric circuitry out of it. Melanin is capable of absorbing ultraviolet radiation and still stay cold. It's one of the most thermodynamic things that we've ever seen. There are physicists today, I don't know if this is true, that claim that dark matter and melanin have the same properties, that they basically do the same thing. So if you think about as above, so below, you can start to see that melanin is our safety shadow, that we have the ability to secrete a black ink into the experience as we're having it, and that the amygdala does that based on how comfortable you are. What I can't cover is that people with schizophrenia, albinism, most of your eye strambolism, all of your issues that deal with a lot of Parkinson's even, come down to too much information or too amplified information. The information is too amplified. And so you end up with people that are burning their filaments out in real time, and we don't know what to do with them, especially since they are threatening the qualia of our consensus of what reality is. The reptile is always sincere because the reptile lacks the ability to lie. This is not an esoteric notion. The reptile doesn't live in the future. Remember? The reptile doesn't live in the past. The reptile lives in the present. Pure reflexology lacks the ability to lie, which is why so many of us have problems with sciatica. All the issues in our back are dealing with two time machines that are competing with the same information. One time machine, the reptile's like, I'm fine, man. I mean, that hurt, but I don't know what hurt it is. I don't even remember it. So yeah, I guess it hurt. I don't remember. You tell me if it hurt. Then you have another system that absolutely feels everything, and that both those have to make an agreement about what just happened to itself. How many of you have noticed that when someone's tickling you, suddenly it turns into pain, right? And that the reason why it turns into pain is for this exact same reason. That we are able to coax our qualia experience and funnel it into, not a reality, but into our quantized version of what we want reality to be. The scientific method is the absence of self, which I believe is antithetical to every experience we will ever have, which makes me question why we are utilizing this method and declaring it clean. The scientific method suggests that none of you who have a personal experience actually had that experience until someone else has it too. In fact, we're going to call you anecdotal to dismiss it. How can we say the world is built on truth when fiction came first? Isn't that weird that there's a word called nonfiction? It's a genre of writing, I know, but this to me is a really big tell. The fact is that we had to first start calling things that were not fiction, nonfiction. We didn't start with nonfiction, right? We started with fiction. And when you start to understand how the brain works, you start to understand the value of fiction. that your Prometheus, your Epimetheus, your forebrain, your hindbrain, and your reflex reptile in the center, one's living in the past, watching all the pain you've had, one's living in the future, trying to find more pleasure. When we start to unwind neurologically what pleasure is, you're not going to like this. You know what pleasure is? The thalamus squeezes you until it thinks you need a reward, and then it lets go for a second. And that's pleasure. That's pleasure. And then from the moment you're born, you've been strangled by your thalamus to create this three-tiered time machine that you have now. This idea of epiphany, of bliss, of religious ecstasy, are tied to the thalamus more than we think. The thalamus itself is the bridal chamber, right? That word comes from, which Greek was it? Built a bed for his wife. His wife doubted him whether or not it was her bed. That was the thalamus. Who is it? Someone? Odysseus. Okay, thank you. It's the thalamus is that bridal chamber. It's where the consecration of the illusion of what you're trying to quantize is forced into existence, and a child is born. The child of your thoughts is born into what you quantize the deer to be as you're looking in the field for it. I got teased last night for pushing transcendentalism to a bunch of Gnostics. Fair maybe. Although I really think Gnostics are more closer to this than they want to admit, but they have to be cool. So we're like, no, everything sucks. But really, they're like, dude, life's fucking cool. All facts are personal. All facts are personal. Everything personal is fact. This is the stepping away from the crutch of objective reality and binding yourself to your own render. You render your world, and you are responsible for every pixel. And until you are ready to lift the weight, as Emerson was, you are going to need objective reality and use those facts instead. Objective reality tells you that only guns kill people. Objective reality tells you that a bump stock, a piece of wood, we need to pass legislation against a bump stock to save people. I'm not pro-gun. I'm not anti-gun. I just think that there's so many ways to kill people that it seems like a distraction to me to pretend that the only way to kill people is with this piece of wood that you can attach to the back of a pistol, and that's what makes everybody die. There's a comfort to this prawn economy. There's a propaganda that installs a certain measure of comfort to most of the people, and this is exactly why we use it. So, if propaganda is used to comfort society, why are we calling propaganda bad? Why are we insisting that propaganda must be evil since it's not true? I remind you, my last name is True. Really weird that I'm sitting here telling you True isn't valid. In order to get here, we need to talk about sight. Just like math, most of us think that the world that we visualize in our eyes is actually what we see, and it's not true. Of course, I'm sure you know that we only see this small part of the spectrum. So reality would be here, and you're here. I can show you historical literature that suggests that a rainbow had 5 colors, not 7. I can show you the history of these things and show you that the quantization of what we experience has grown over time because our resolution has grown. And if our resolution has grown, maybe this world is perfect. Maybe it's perfect. Malamu and Pulutu. I'm probably pronouncing those wrong, but no one hears from Samaria, so what? I want to talk about this briefly, though, because the writings, as much as we can gather, keep in mind I'm a complete neophyte here, but the idea of a glimmering, that people who intimidated us in the time of Samaria had a white glimmering sheen, it was described, a glittering, and that power itself was seen as a white glittering. When you look over the water, you see the white sparkles. And I want you to imagine that when you see someone that you think has power, that your eyes are seeing someone who's glimmering. They're shimmering. And that this was probably what reality actually was. And as you see what I'm about to show you, I think this will make more sense, but I wanted to start here. There's nothing visual about the eyes. Many of us think that we have 3 cones that are based for each color, and that's just not true. We thought that, It turns out the opsins, the chemical itself, is the one that does the interpretation. We have 3 wavelengths of interpretation, but those wavelengths aren't necessarily limited to red light or green light or blue light. We simply have 3 collectors that collect different wavelengths of light, and then the opsins come in later and decide what is this. Anyone who's a female, you probably see electricity. Males probably don't. There's a 4th kind of vision that has come online in the last 100 years or so. I can't prove it's come online in the last 100 years or so, but if you kind of follow my logic here, I think it makes sense. And that fish see electricity, and so do women. It's not necessarily purely only women see electricity, only men don't. In fact, if you know anyone that's colorblind, they're not colorblind. They don't have the quantization between red and green. They quantize those as the same, right? So I can play a chromatic harmonica. It has 12 holes. And I can play a C major harmonica, and it has 7 holes, maybe 8. And that those are the same instrument, but one is capable of playing any song in any key, and the other has to sit out and wait for the key of C to come along, or only play during the certain parts during an E flat, or all the other stuff that fits in. Early eyes detected direction, not sight or color. I just learned this like 2 months ago. The Allen Institute in 2006 took a rabies bullet and shot it through the brain of a mouse. I don't like that they did that, but they did. And that they were able to use the rabies virus to trace every single neural pathway and build an atlas of the brain. This is 2006. We've never done this before. We've never done this before. The precipice of new information that's coming in is utterly, utterly mind-blowing. We cannot keep up with all the new insights, and I believe it'll be 50, 60 years to where this finally makes it into a standard textbook. There's an ancient pathway, retinal pathway below the eyes, and that ancient pathway, the theory is that it was built long before the retinal structure you see now, and that when you were in the room minding your own business and you suddenly turn, that they think that is actually the ancient motion pathway detecting movement, and the reason why it startles you is because your neocortex didn't see it. So your neocortex is like, oh my God, what do you mean there's things happening that I don't know? What do you mean? And so we have this kind of visceral reaction to it. The eyes are so much more conglomerated than we think. If you look at the equipment, we think that we're taking in information, sending it back to our occipital lobe, processing it, but we don't actually know that for sure. The eyes have afferent and efferent nerves. This means that the eye doesn't just send information to the brain sends information to the eye. And that what is being sent, we don't know yet. I'm about to speculate. I have no proof of this. I'm a freaking neophyte, probably shouldn't even listen to this. But we know that the amygdala regulates the intensity of our experience. We know that inside the retinal wall there is a epithelial wall, and that planted into this epithelial wall are the light bulbs that we see. And I used to think that the light bulbs that detect light would obviously be facing out in our eyes, that they'd be facing outward to detect the light, but they face in. They're planted like sprouts, like carrots, into the walls of our retinal, and that surrounding those walls are melanocytes. The ability to black out the information that's coming in is directly at your eyeballs, which means that you have a throttle that when reality comes in and it's too intense, you're able to stop yourself from becoming a deer trapped in the headlights. You're able to stop yourself from playing possum or freezing up. We still enter shock, but the reason why we don't enter shock more is because we have the amygdala. Think of the amygdala as Mother Mary, and that she's cradling every experience you have. And if the sun is too bright, she's going to cover your head. And that this becomes important because you're hardwired into this amplifier, and that the feedback would simply kill you if you couldn't throttle it down. I say this because I need you to know that lying to yourself becomes an instrument of sight. Dopamine is the only exchange of token that you can use to see. Science has been able to eliminate the dopamine inhibitors. It's actually not quite the inhibitors, but to change the amount of dopamine that comes into the eye, and that when you do this inside a mouse, the mouse loses the ability to see. All the equipment still works, but they've run out of the currency of dopamine, and that without that currency, the body does the same thing it does. If the body has a dopamine deficiency, you get a lethargy. The person doesn't want to move. The person doesn't want to see. So dopamine ends up kind of being this casino chip. I wish I could go more into this about how these casino chips work, because it's all fraud. Your thalamus is committing fraud all the time. First of all, it's telling you, oh no, I would give you more pleasure, but I'm all out. We're all out of pleasure over here. And that's the system it uses to monitor you. As I said before, we only find what we seek. We only seek what we know. We struggle to catch things outside of this spectrum. The sheer discomfort of knowing that we did not see this really large elephant in the room. We literally have an expression, elephant in the room, which kind of proves this whole point even more. To me, this really struck me. It may streak you. That's the amygdala. 2 yellow dots right behind the eye sockets. And that I believe the amygdala is more responsible for vision than the retina is, precisely because of this emotional throttle that it has. I should clarify that we still don't know if this is exactly happening in the amygdala. We think it is. It's probably going to be more about the entire relationship between the hippocampus and the amygdala. We're still working on this stuff. We, as if I'm not doing anything. So melanin is a brake. And that these cones are inserted into your eye. This is the part that detects light, and it's under the skin. And it's under the skin surrounded by the melanocytes. Albinism, oh man. Moses, albino. If I could tell you more about this albinism is the lack of melanin. If you cannot discreetly secrete melanin, I want you to imagine that you cannot turn the volume down. And if you can't turn the volume down, you're going to develop schizophrenia, or people are going to call you a shaman. That's what happens in Africa. Not only that, but your body parts are collected on the streets of Tanzania because they know there's some type of shamanic vision inside of these things. And so we end up treating them as fetish. The hands of a child are a fetish because of the lack of melanin. Which brings us to what I believe is the true essence of Plato's cave. Last year, I introduced to you the concept of the oracle of mythology. It's simply a fancy word for biological intelligence, that you know more about the workings of your body, but because you haven't logically placed it in your neocortex yet, you don't think you know it. There's a concept called blind sight, where people have lost the ability to see simply because they think they cannot see. And that when these people have suffered from these, there's a lot of different characteristics. I'm trying to be fast here, but in order to help them see, the doctor tells them to try and guess. To try and guess, is there a baseball in front of you or not? And that when monkeys do this, they're highly accurate. So a monkey can have its optic nerve removed, but the blind sight's still able to process the information because it's intuitive. He's intuitively looking. And that we have trouble doing the same thing as monkeys do because of how accurate our neocortex is. So when you have a case like this, you can actually help someone by encouraging them to guess, because guessing is firing up their intuition. And when they build up enough faith in their intuition, they can walk on different legs. This is Plato's cave. This is Plato's cave. That the world is painted into you on a cavernous wall, and that the shadows are controlled by the epithelial wall, the melanin, the melanocytes that secrete, and that the moment a shadow on the wall is too intense, is too scary, there's an ink that will blot it out for you. So to come to the truth of the light is to climb out of the canal, out of Plato's cave, into the realm of consciousness, into the center of your being. I would argue this is the pineal, not for esoteric reasons. There's actually a lot of brain sand stuff that's been done lately where there's like crystals in there that are, I know we like this so hard to say because it's debunked that your fluoride like crystallizes. I mean, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the actual inside of your pineal is made up of what they call brain sand. And that this brain sand actually has a certain crystalline structure that has a physioelectrical effect that when it's squeezed, electrical information comes out. And that I'm just arguing in a really wild speculation that actually could be our first eye, not our third eye. And that every single thing that you could be interpreting could be coming through this sonar buoy that's suspended outside of the electrical system of your brain, the only part of your brain that's singular, by the way, the only part of your brain that's outside of the electrical system, submerged inside a cranial spinal fluid that runs all the way down your spine, which means that the antenna of the water inside of you is perturbating. And when I have an erect posture like this, I see more wavelength. And when I am hunched over like this, I see less wavelength because of this sonar inside. I operated sonar equipment in the Navy as a job. It was my job to use that to listen. And that simply by submerging a microphone in a liquid, I could hear a whale 1,000 miles away. The idea of it being submerged in liquid gives it this amplification. And it could be the only way we see. It could be that the first eye receives this information and sends it into the retina to paint it on the walls of Plato's cave. And we know this through the oracle mythology. We just haven't discovered it yet. Well, I think I'm going backwards. There are no blue cones inside the fovea. I'm using the old term blue cones. There are no cones that interpret blue, which means that the wavelength that it's accepting is not present inside the fovea. What's the fovea? This is where all of your color is interpreted. Everything outside the fovea is brightness, contrast. There's no color, mostly. But you're really just determining how bright something is, and as I said before, where is the vector of the motion? That knowing the vector of movement is really more about how the eye sees. And the reason why I'm telling you this, I hope you'll find pretty profound in the next slide, but there are no blue receptors inside the very parabola that we use to interpret color. You guys probably remember this. I think this is a new phenomenon because we are gaining the resolution to understand these things now. The objective crutch on all of us insisting that blue is the same is loosening. We are becoming uncoupled from the dock, and we are stepping out of the harbor for the first time. Here's the cone map of the fovea. These are statistical representations, right? So the number of blues that you see is a statistical representation of how many of those cones would be. This circle is basically the fovea. So you can see that the fovea is focused on wavelengths that are closer to the green and the red spectrum. It's weird, right? Like, we see blue everywhere. How can we see blue everywhere if we don't have a blue receptor in the very part that determines color? And the answer is you hallucinate blue. This isn't a James True speculation. We actually know that if you do the math for the amount of blue cones you have, the sky should not be so vivid, that color should not be there. It should be more of a dull gray, they say. And that the reason why I think this is important is because I need you to know that the eyes are not showing you blue. You are painting the eyes blue because you deserve to see something beautiful. You deserve to see something beautiful because the retina is the organ in the body that generates the most dopamine. This is why so many of us are moved by icons, by silhouettes. Men, you are actually more inclined to the visual pleasure that you see in shape. And it's precisely because of the negotiation it has with the thalamus. The thalamus is very selfish. And if you can get this dopamine from the retina, you have the ability to hack the system, which we do. So the blue that you see in the sky is a hallucination. Now, what's even more profound is the short wavelengths that scatter across the sky correspond to the colors blue and violet, making the real color of the sky purple. And if you follow the oracle mythology, I know some of you guys are like, hey, Phoenicia. Yeah, I know, right? That the idea of the royalist color is the same concept of the one that's hardest to see. The one that requires the most qualia to render is the royal color of purple. And that blue would be the doorway into the purple, as it were. Okay, Homer's Odyssey. Amazing. First of all, I don't know Greek. Forgive me for even trying to present this. This is not my work. But as we look at the Odyssey, we find that on an epic tale about an ocean, so the sky and the ocean, not once is the word blue used. These are all quotes. I wish I had time to read them because they're really cool. I think they give you a connotation of the consciousness that was alive then. Glimmering is used much more than color is. The word glimmering. That the glimmering sea, remember that Malamu I told you about? That when the Sumerians saw something that was intimidating, it glimmered. That early vision could have very well been this kind of glimmering. That the only way the eyes could inform the neocortex that something dangerous or important is over there is to glimmer. And that by glimmering, you're activating those ancient pathways of motion, and that would be the way to get the brain's attention. If you want to check these out later, this is all over the web. William Gladstone said the organs of color and its impressions were but partially developed among the Greeks in the heroic age. Lazarus Geiger noticed the same thing. In the earliest mental productions that are preserved for us, the various people of the earth, notwithstanding 1,000 obvious and often urgently pressing occasions that you could have used the word blue, I'm going to help you understand this faster. The color blue is not mentioned at all. All three of these guys found the same thing. Hugo Magnus was the third. And what I want you to catch here, really important, is the order at which colors developed in consciousness. And that we rose through the spectrum of resolution from a 7-hold harmonica to a 12-hold harmonica in real time. These men think that no blue is found in all of these ancient languages. I've heard debate about this. I'll just leave it at that because there's so much to cover. I did this. I don't translate Greek. I had to use what the popular culture would call a Greek translation, and I did a query for these terms. And black is used almost 200 times. White is used almost 100 times. Red, 7. 7. Think of all the blood in that story. Yellow, 5. Green, 4. Something really big about this? Let's go back here for a sec. Wait. Look at the order. First black and white, then red, then green, then yellow. Now let's go over here. Red, lower vibration light. Yellow, green, blue. We are tacking our way up through the qualia. We're gaining resolution. And by the resolution changing from 4-bit to 8-bit to 16-bit, our color spectrum is growing. And if you follow this, it would mean that the purple sky, will be the land where we'll be on a 16-base color, let's say, versus 12, just making those numbers up. Bigger clue. Some of you are like, probably heard the 440 hertz is a Nazi propaganda thing. It always ruins me trying to present this slide because it's not nearly as exciting as that. But if you want to put on nipple clamps, I'll wait and then tell you this. During Bach, standard tuning was 427 hertz. What does that mean? The A below middle C was at 427 hertz. In the 1860s, because of France, by the way, we changed it to a French standard and we raised our hertz from 427 to 435. So the same note is rendered at a higher resolution, at a higher wavelength, because our resolution has improved. Modern times, we moved to 440 hertz. Oh, is it time to go? I'm sorry. I had an alarm and I guess it went off. Time's up. I'm so sorry. I hate to end it that way, but yeah. Wow, I'm way over. I'm so sorry, Miguel. Sorry about that. I guess in conclusion, I'll just say one of the oldest stories in Africa is that the skies are red and white. That the tradition of Swahili is that the heavens are red and white. In Mixcoatl, the premonition for Uncle Sam is known as the one who grows fresh hearts that will be sacrificed on the red and white fields of the land. The Rust Belt of America was alive during Mixcoatl. That's all I got. I really appreciate it. I'm so sorry for going over. Really.
Thank you. Awesome.
I had no idea. I had to learn.
Okay. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Join Patreon, AB Prime, or Red Circle and get full episodes and podcast summary and other cool bonuses. Clean, edited episodes on a private RSS feed. And no more commercials. Support Aeon Byte.